Kai's driving had changed significantly since the last time we rode in a car together. He seemed to, dare I say, act almost neutral towards the whole situation. I kept my body still, my eyes focused intently on the passing cars and buildings we drove by. I refused to mess this up. We pulled into an overhang connected to a large brick building. I didn't get a good look at it, as Kai immediately got out of the driver's side and began to walk across the car to my side. That was my cue. I opened the door to be met with his hand. Immediately, butterflies erupted in my stomach seeing his gesture. I shouldn't have had that reaction. Deep down, I just wanted him to show a little chivalry. Was that so bad? I hesitated to take it, though. My mind was fogged with his behavioral change. I glanced up at his eyes and was met with an indifferent expression. I placed my hand in his, immediately feeling the warmth he carried, and stood up. Just this simple act caused my face to blush. As he handed the keys to the parking valet, he led M towards the door. His hand rested against the small of my back. He's good at acting like he's a decent fiance, I'll give him that. As we entered, a group of people all dressed to the nines looked over at us with intrigued faces. Embarrassment flooded over me like an uncomfortable sheet. I wasn't sure they were looking at me per se, but I knew their eyes were in our direction. Did everyone do this to the couples that walked in the door? We walked straight past them, feeling their eyes up until we were out of view. Suddenly, Kai gripped my waist and pulled me against his chest. My heart rate picked up tremendously. What was this about? Had I already done something? He bent down and dipped his face beside my ear, his jaw brushing my cheek. Stay beside me the whole time. Do not move from my line of sight unless I saw otherwise. Understand? His breath fanned my earlobe, making me slightly shudder. I nodded, my entire body shaking at our close proximity. Since when was he so bossy? Good was all that he said. I knew he saw how I reacted, and I'm sure that disgusted him more than he let on, but fortunately for me, he didn't say anything about it. His hand rested back where it had originally been, and he straightened himself back to his full height. I took a moment to look around the huge venue, hoping to distract myself from what had just happened between us. The flooring was a beautiful mosaic of some kind, and the walls were painted with what looked to be little gold specks in the cream paint. The tables were positioned off to the side with long black tablecloths, each topped with name tags. A large crystal chandelier hung in the middle of the room, centering the ballroom perfectly. A few couples walked over to us. The first was a couple that seemed to be around our age. The man had green eyes and blonde hair. His wife, Elle assumed, sported the same hair color, but her eyes were a dashing blue. Kai, you never told me you were engaged to the Moore's daughter. She's quite breathtaking, isn't she? He gave me a small smile. Kai smiled but tightened his grip on my back. Lars, how's business going in England? He asked, changing the subject completely. Oh, well, it could be better. You know how the competition can be, eh? Dominic should be here. I want him to run a new deal across you and see what you think. The pricing for product is at an all-time low in Croatia around this time. Kai hummed. Do I have a choice? He said in an annoyed tone, one that I knew all too well. That made the man called Lars laugh and grab his stomach for effect. Not at all. The two men exchanged friendly nods before Lars bid Kai a farewell, and me a wink. The next couple came up to speak. The man was tall. His dark, almost black eyes and thick and sharp jaw made him look more scary than Kai. His wife, I was assuming, was a shorter woman with olive skin and black curls that framed her face. They were both beautiful and seemed nice enough. The man went straight to talking with Kai, and his wife gave me a sweet smile. I returned her gesture. Monica, do you think you could keep an eye on Rowan for me? I'll just need to have a few words with Emmanuel. Kai asked, his thumb slowly tapping a few times on my back. Why was he being so protective? Everyone here was of some importance. I don't see why I needed to be watched like a child. Just a few days ago, he was telling me how unimportant I was. The girl with black curls smiled and nodded, her black curls bouncing around her shoulders, of course, Kai. Her accent was thick Romanian. Come, let the boys play, she smiled, holding out her arm for me to take. I obliged, although a little nervous. So you seem to have harnessed the bucking bronco. I never thought someone could do it, she said as we took a few steps to the side. I nervously looked over at Kai, who kept his eyes trained on me from afar. What was going on? I guess I responded with a small smile. He didn't really have a choice. You're a beautiful couple. I must warn you, though. Kai can be gruff at times. She replied, eyeing the two men as they conversed. Yes, he can be. I agreed, remembering all of the times he absolutely showed his gruff side. She pulled me closer to her. Are you enjoying the party so far? I nodded. Not really. She smiled once again. I never like going to these functions. I always feel out of sorts here. Not many. People are nice and talkative, she explained, her eyes darting to each person around us. Have you been married to Emmanuel long? I asked. She laughed a bit. 4 years? So yes, I'd say so. I glanced back over at the two men. Kai had finally taken his eyes off of me, which made me relax a little. What could they be talking about? I wondered aloud. Monica's face scrunched into one of discomfort. The business. Well, that was explanatory. I decided to not press further on the topic, seeing her reaction to my question. Before I could say anything else, Kai's hand was back on my waist, guiding me away from Monica. She gave me a small wave. It was lovely to talk to you, Owen. Hopefully we'll be seeing each other soon. I smiled. Of course, I returned. As we walked towards our respective table, I glanced out into the party. If this was a business-type event, where were Kai's parents and where were mine? I thought about asking Kai, but ultimately decided against it. My question wasn't worth knowing at the expense of Kai's mood towards we didn't sit down for a while. Instead, we greeted people who came up to us. Kai chatted with the men for a while, the women, and I exchanged a few smiles or glances, and then the next couple came. I didn't get used to having Kai's hand on me until a few hours into the event. It still didn't feel natural, but my body was no longer internally panicking. After we had eaten a very small dinner, Kai downed his scotch and stood up. Let's go. I obeyed and followed behind him. I wanted nothing more than to be in my bed and alone. As we were walking out, I felt a hand grab my arm. I turned thinking it was Monica, but was met with a broad chest. You seem to have dropped this. A deep Greek, accented voice boomed behind me. I craned my neck to look at the deep voice's source. I wasn't disappointed. His eyes were as dark as Emmanuel's, his nose was hooked, and his cheeks were high-placed. His hair was slicked back, but a few curls escaped the trap and hung against his forehead. He was nothing short of gorgeous, which caused my face to redden being that close to him. He saw it and smirked. God, how did people this pretty exist? He held up my silver choker between his index finger and thumb. Do you need some assistance in putting it back on WPOsomorphy? He asked, his eyes raking over my entire body. I smiled shyly, but just before I could answer, I felt a presence behind me. The feeling of dread immediately following. An arm stretched out and plucked the necklace from the man's hands before gently clasping it around my neck. His finger brushed my shoulders and lingered there for a while before trailing down to my arm and giving it a tight squeeze. I was in trouble. Ah, Kai Parker, just the man I was hoping to catch. Is this gorgeous specimen your date tonight? He asked, looking over at me once more with the same smirk he sported just moments ago. That she is Dominic, he gritted. How can I help you? Dominic and Kai quickly began speaking in Greek. From what I was assuming to shield others from their conversation. I recognized a few words, but ultimately was lost after a few sentences back and forth. I mentally slapped myself for quitting my Greek lessons early on. My father never really spoke his native language in the house, so I was stunted in the culture department. After a few more words and glance exchanges from Dominic, they bowed their farewells, and I was pulled out of the doors and shoved into the Tesla. You didn't listen to me. I looked at him. His face was calm, but his eyes were dark and glowing with anger. I'm sorry. When I tell you to do something, I mean it, Rowan. The anger in his voice was seeping throughout the car. I hung my head. Here I thought we could escape you the night without an issue. I was wrong. None of those men in there mean well, none of them. And you do? I didn't say anything. The worst thing Elle could do was challenge someone like Kai Parker, especially right now. We didn't speak the rest of the ride back to the house, and I was grateful for it. Once we arrived home, I wasted no time in going upstairs and shutting myself in my room. I undressed, took off my makeup, and pulled my hair up into a bun. If he didn't want me to speak with anyone besides Monica, then why did he bring me to an event like that? I could have stayed home. There was a knock at my door. "Oh no, come in," I called. My voice cracked a little out of the tense state I was now in. I was an open book when it came to certain emotions. I couldn't help it. Delia's head popped into the room. "May I have a word, Miss Rowan?" I sighed in relief. "Okay." She waited until the door was closed behind her before speaking. "I'm glad to see you're still here. When Kai called yesterday evening and asked about you, Elle had told him that I hadn't seen you anywhere. He came home first thing. He asked about me." I shrugged. I was in the garden most of the time. "The note I had left you was gone as well, so I figured you did leave after all." I pulled open the drawer and handed her the folded bills. "I appreciate you for this, Delia, but this is yours, and I couldn't possibly run away with it. If I'm leaving, don't want anyone else to have to suffer their job at my expense, which is why I kept the money here in case someone came and saw the evidence." I realized then that it had been my fault Kai was back so early. "I thought about what you had said, and I didn't want you to feel so trapped you were unhappy. If you truly don't want to give this marriage a try, I can't force you. You've been forced enough. I left for the night to give you time to leave unnoticed," she explained. I gave her a small smile. "I think, Elle, I'm going to give it one last try. So far, nothing awful has happened," I said while knocking on the wood of my bedside table. I was superstitious. Delia gave me one last smile before opening the door a tad and turning to me. "I'm proud of you. Someday Kai will realize the sacrifice you've made, and he will be grateful." "One can only dream," I replied. Kai being grateful was like a pig learning to fly. Completely impossible. Delia left, leaving me alone once again. I turned to the side of the bed and picked up the book one had been reading those hours ago, ready to unwind in my personal fantasy. Sometimes reading romance novels made me sad about my own loneliness. I had never once had a boyfriend, and never really saw the need to, since most of the men I saw were selfish pigs. It was still nice to imagine what a healthy relationship might be for someone like me. There was another knock at my door. "Yes?" I called, vexed that I was interrupted from my reading now twice today. It was Delia again. "Kai would like to have a word with you." Great. Another lecture and reminder how inferior I am. I got up, making sure to leave my book in its place, and began my journey out the door. My palms began to sweat. Thinking of all the possible insults he could throw at me for talking to Dominic tonight was beginning to hurt my head. Now that he was back, I couldn't leave, even if I wanted to. Now I was stuck. Delia was waiting for me. "He's in the library. I'll lead you to it," she said softly, touching my shoulder. I sighed as we walked. It felt like the house was forever long, walking down hallways and past doors. It all felt confusing. Once we made it to the door, Delia knocked and opened it wide enough for me to slink inside and shut it tight behind me. Kai was sitting in a leather chair, his phone screen lighting up his eyes as he tapped at the buttons. When was he ever off that thing? He glanced up at me before putting his phone down. "Sit." I trudged to the chair, immediately feeling self-conscious, in my carefree attire, as he was now in a crisp white button-up and black slacks. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he had ran his hands through it a few times. It'd be lying if I said he wasn't attractive. His actions, however, muted his looks by a long shot. His eyes never left mine until I sat down across from him. "We have a luncheon to attend to tomorrow, for my father's business. There's some things I want to discuss." I gulped. "Here it comes." He positioned himself on the edge of his chair, demanding my attention. His eyes were dark, but they weren't angry like they had been. Was he still mad at me? "You will stay beside me the entire time. No excuses. You will not leave my sight at any time while we are there. Do you understand?" Why was he acting like this? I'm a big girl, Elle can handle myself. Rowan, he said slightly louder than before, do you understand? I nodded. Say you understand. It took me a moment to realize what he was doing. He was making me submit. And to me that was still a form of insult. Making me feel more inferior instead of using words. Asshole. He didn't like to wait, he leaned even further, closer to my face than before, daring me to disobey. I understand. Good, he sat back, placing his knees on his hands. I stood up, eager to leave before the insults were thrown my way. I was angry and I knew if Elle stayed longer I'd end up earning those dreaded insults. I didn't say you could leave. I looked at him. His face was smug with impending control. Sit, Elle obeyed. If I blew up, it would make things worse. He fueled my fear to control me. I didn't like it, but couldn't do anything about it. Not yet. I sat back down, my discomfort plastered all over my features. We leave at 10 sharp, wear something formal, and do not be late. Okay? You may go, he said, picking up his phone and unlocking the screen. As I left, I wanted to turn and say something rude, but thought better of it. No use stooping to his level. After finally getting back to my room, I was no longer in the mood to read. I'd have to deal with Kai, both of his parents, possibly mine, and every other rich bitch that attended. I needed a break. After sitting on my bed for a while feeling shitty about the luncheon, I decided on a bath, and to get into bed. That a long day of torture to endure tomorrow and needed some sleep. If I was going to survive this, I needed to take care of myself and grow a backbone.